There's a difference between a bad business decision and a fatal one. A bad decision costs you money. A fatal one costs you everything: your reputation, your legacy, your name in a county where your grandfather built the first building on Main Street. Rick Hollister made a fatal decision in March of 2019, and it took exactly 87 days for that decision to erase 43 years of family business, destroy 12 farmers' trust in used equipment, and turn a Massey Ferguson dealership into a legal nightmare that made regional news. This isn't a story about a bad quarter. This is about what happens when desperation meets opportunity. When a man who spent his entire life selling iron decides that survival justifies one small adjustment, one technical shortcut that nobody would notice. Except somebody did notice. And when that somebody posted receipts, service records, and a side-by-side photo of 2-hour displays on the same Massey Ferguson 8S.265 tractor, showing a 1,700-hour difference, everything came apart. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday. By Friday, his line of credit was frozen. By the end of the month, AGCO Corporate pulled his franchise agreement. And by day 87, Hollister Ag Equipment, founded in 1976, operated by 3 generations, known across 4 counties as the place you went for honest iron and fair deals, was auctioning off its own inventory to pay legal fees. This is the story of how one man's decision to roll back hour meters on used Massey Fergusons became the fastest dealership collapse in the region's history, and why, in tight-knit farming communities, trust is the only currency that actually matters. AC-1, the setup. Rick Hollister wasn't a crook. That's the part that made this whole thing worse. He was a third-generation equipment dealer in a town of 1,400 people, running a business his grandfather started in a steel building off Highway 36. Hollister Ag Equipment sold Massey Ferguson tractors, combines, hay equipment, and short-line attachments. They serviced what they sold. They honored warranties. They showed up when machines broke down. For 40 years, that reputation held. Rick's father, Tom Hollister, had built the business on a simple rule: sell it straight, service it right, and sleep at night. And for most of Rick's career, that's exactly what he did. But by 2018, the farm economy had been bleeding for 3 straight years. Commodity prices were down. Farmer income was down. New equipment sales had nearly stopped. The entire rural Midwest was in what analysts politely called a prolonged correction, which in dealership terms meant you either adapted, consolidated, or closed. Rick tried to adapt. He expanded his used equipment lot. He offered aggressive trade-in deals. He started buying repossessed iron at auctions and flipping it with slim margins just to keep cash moving through the business. And for a while it worked. But by early 2019, the pressure was crushing. His operating loan was maxed. His parts inventory was aging. He had 4 employees he couldn't afford to lose and couldn't afford to keep. And every month he watched another small dealership in the region either get bought out or shut down. Rick was 56 years old, sitting in an office his father built, staring at a balance sheet that showed he had maybe 6 months before the bank started asking hard questions. That's when he made the decision. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned in some backroom conspiracy. It started with one tractor, a 2015 Massey Ferguson 7, 6, and 18 Dyna VT that came in on trade. Beautiful machine, excellent condition. But it had 3,100 hours on the meter, which in the used market meant it was priced in the mid-range, not the premium tier. Rick knew that if he could get that number below 2,000 hours, he could sell it for $12,000 more, and he knew how to do it. Modern tractors track hours in 2 places: the dashboard display and the internal service computer. The display is what buyers see. The service computer is what dealers access during diagnostics. If you had the right software, and Rick did, you could reset the display. You couldn't change the service computer. But most buyers never checked it. Most buyers looked at the dash, looked at the condition, and made their decision. Rick told himself it was a one-time move, a survival play. He'd sell the 7, 6, and 18, use the margin to cover payroll, and never do it again. He rolled the meter back to 1,850 hours. He listed it for $78,000. It sold in 11 days. And that's when the logic shifted. Because if one tractor could carry that margin, why not 2? Why not 5? Over the next 8 months, Rick Hollister rolled back the hour meters on 17 used Massey Ferguson tractors. Not all of them, just the ones where the adjustment made a significant price difference. Just the ones where he needed the margin to stay afloat. He told himself he was selling good equipment. He told himself the machines were solid. He told himself that hours were just a number and condition was what really mattered. And for 8 months, nobody questioned it. He sold tractors to farmers he'd known for 20 years. He sold to young operators buying their first iron. He sold to estate buyers looking for reliable equipment. Every sale was clean, every handshake was firm, and every hour meter was a lie. Rick Hollister thought he was managing a cash flow problem. What he was actually doing was building a lawsuit with 17 plaintiffs, a fraud case that would make the county newspaper, and a reputation collapse so complete that farmers would eventually avoid his inventory lot even during the liquidation auction. But in September 2019, none of that had happened yet. In September, Rick was just a dealer trying to survive. And then a 28-year-old farmer named Ethan Crow bought a Massey Ferguson 8S.65. Ace 2, the breaking point. Ethan Crow was exactly the kind of customer Rick Hollister needed. Young, ambitious, running 1,400 acres of corn and soybeans with his father, looking to upgrade from their aging fleet of 180 horsepower tractors to something with serious pulling power. The Massey Ferguson 8S.265 was perfect for him. 265 horsepower, Dyna VT transmission, front-wheel assist, low hours. Rick had taken it in on trade 3 months earlier from an estate sale in Iowa. It was a 2017 model, cherry red, minimal wear, one owner, the kind of iron that made buyers feel confident. The hour meter read 1,580 hours. Rick priced it at $164,000. Ethan test drove it on a Friday afternoon. Smooth power, responsive hydraulics, quiet cab, everything felt tight. He brought his father out the next morning for a second look. They checked the tires, they checked the fluids, they looked under the hood. Everything was clean. The deal closed on Monday. Ethan financed $140,000 through farm credit. He drove the 8S home that afternoon and parked it in the shed next to his father's old Deere. For the first 2 weeks, it ran flawlessly. He used it to pull a 12-row planter. He used it for heavy tillage. He used it to move grain carts during late harvest. The tractor performed exactly as expected. And then, in early October, the transmission started slipping. It wasn't catastrophic, just occasional hesitation when shifting under load. Ethan figured it was a software glitch, something a dealer update would fix. He called Hollister Ag and scheduled a service appointment. The mechanic, a guy named Dale who'd worked for Rick for 15 years, ran a diagnostic on the tractor's computer system. That's when the numbers didn't match. The dashboard display showed 1,680 hours. The internal service computer showed 4,190 hours. Dale stared at the screen for a long time. Then he called Ethan over. "You need to see this." Ethan looked at the readout. He didn't understand at first. "What am I looking at?" Dale pointed to the two numbers. "Your dash says 1,680. The computer says 4,190. That's a 2,500-hour difference." Ethan's stomach dropped. "How does that happen?" Dale hesitated. He'd worked in dealerships long enough to know exactly how it happened, but saying it out loud meant accusing his boss of fraud. "Sometimes the display gets reset," Dale said carefully. "Sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes it's not." Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and took a picture of both screens. "I need a printed copy of that diagnostic report." Dale printed it. Ethan walked out of the shop, got in his truck, and drove straight to a lawyer's office in the county seat. 8th-3. The Unraveling. The first Facebook post went live on October 18, 2019. Ethan didn't write a long essay. He didn't make accusations. He just posted 2 photos side by side. One showing the dashboard hour meter, 1,680 hours. One showing the service computer readout, 4,190 hours. The caption was simple. "Bought this Massey Ferguson 8S from Hollister Ag 4 weeks ago. Can someone explain why the hours don't match?" Within 2 hours, the post had 47 comments. Within 6 hours, 3 other farmers had replied with similar stories. One had bought a 7S210 6 months earlier. Dashboard showed 1,920 hours. Service computer showed 3,400. Another had bought a 6S180 in the spring. Dashboard, Death Computer 2U680. A third had bought an 8730 combine. Dashboard, 980 hours. Computer, 2,200. Every single one had been sold by Hollister Ag Equipment. Every single one had been a low-hour dealer-certified machine, and every single one had a rolled-back meter. By the end of the week, the post had been shared 200 times across regional farm groups. Rick Hollister's phone started ringing. Some calls were angry, some were confused, some were just farmers asking if the Facebook post was real. Rick tried to control the damage. He called Ethan directly and offered to buy the tractor back at full price. No questions asked. Ethan refused. "I don't want the tractor back. I want to know how many other people you did this to." Rick called two of the other farmers who'd posted and offered the same deal. Both refused. One of them said, "You sold me a lie, Rick. You don't fix that with a buyback." By the third week of October, 12 farmers had contacted a plaintiff's attorney in Des Moines who specialized in agricultural fraud cases. His name was Martin Keswick, and he was very, very good at his job. Keswick filed a class action lawsuit on November 5, 2019. The complaint alleged systematic odometer fraud across 17 used tractors, violation of federal odometer disclosure laws, breach of implied warranty, fraudulent misrepresentation, unjust enrichment. The lawsuit named Rick Hollister personally and Hollister Ag Equipment as defendants. It sought actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney fees. And it requested a jury trial. The complaint was filed in federal court, which meant it became public record. The local newspaper ran the story on page 1. Local dealer accused of odometer fraud in federal lawsuit. The regional ag publication picked it up 2 days later. And within a week, Rick Hollister's business was effectively finished. Rick Hollister had spent 40 years building trust in a farm community where your word was your reputation and your reputation was your business. It took 12 farmers, 1 lawsuit, and 1 viral Facebook post to erase all of it in 3 weeks. But the legal destruction was just beginning. Because once federal odometer fraud allegations hit the public record, the banks start paying attention. And when banks start paying attention, credit lines disappear fast. AC4. The collapse. On November 12th, exactly 7 days after the lawsuit was filed, Rick received a letter from his primary lender. It was short, professional, devastating. Due to reputational risk and pending litigation, your operating line of credit is hereby suspended pending further review. That single sentence ended his business. Rick's dealership operated on credit. Every dealer does. You borrow to buy inventory. You borrow to cover payroll during slow months. You borrow to float parts orders and service operations while waiting for customer payments. Without a line of credit, you can't operate. Rick called the bank immediately. The loan officer, someone he'd worked with for 12 years, was apologetic but firm. "Rick, we can't extend credit to a business facing federal fraud charges. It's policy. If the lawsuit gets dismissed or settled, we can revisit. But until then, the line stays frozen." Rick tried 2 other regional banks. Both declined. One was blunt. "We're not touching this until the legal situation resolves." By mid-November, Rick couldn't make payroll. He called his 4 employees into the office and told them the dealership was suspending operations indefinitely. 2 of them had worked for him for over a decade. One of them, Dale, the mechanic who discovered the first rolled-back meter, just nodded and said, "I figured this was coming." Rick offered to write recommendation letters. Nobody asked for one. They all knew that being associated with Hollister Ag Equipment was now a liability in the regional dealership market. On November 18th, AGCO Corporation, the parent company of Massey Ferguson, sent a formal notice of franchise termination. The letter cited violations of dealer conduct standards and reputational harm to the Massey Ferguson brand. Rick was given 30 days to cease using Massey Ferguson branding, return all dealer-exclusive diagnostic tools, and remove all signage. He'd been a Massey Ferguson dealer for 43 years. His father had signed the original franchise agreement in 1976. And now, in a single paragraph of corporate legal language, it was over. By early December, Rick's attorney delivered the worst news yet. The federal lawsuit was solid. The evidence was overwhelming. 12 farmers had documented proof of rolled-back meters. The diagnostic reports were clear. "You're going to lose this case," the attorney said. "The only question is how much it's going to cost you." Settlement negotiations began. The plaintiff's attorney wanted $1.2 million. Rick countered at $400,000. They settled at $875,000. Rick didn't have $875,000. He didn't have $400,000. He had a closed dealership, a frozen credit line, a canceled franchise agreement, and a building full of used equipment that nobody wanted to buy because it came from that dealer who rolled back the meters. His only option was liquidation. The auction was held on January 14, 2020, a cold Tuesday morning with freezing rain. Rick stood in the back of the crowd and watched as 40 years of inventory sold for a fraction of its value. Tractors, combines, hay equipment, parts bins, diagnostic computers, office furniture, everything went. The Massey Ferguson sign came down the day before the auction. A crew removed it in less than an hour. 43 years of branding, gone. The building sold 3 weeks later to a John Deere dealership expanding into the region. They repainted, they rebranded, they hired new staff. Within 6 months, you couldn't tell Hollister Ag Equipment had ever existed. Rick Hollister destroyed his family's business in 87 days. But the lawsuits, the bankruptcy, the franchise termination, none of that was the worst part. The worst part was what happened in the community. Because in a small farming town, you can lose your business and recover, but once you lose your name, you don't get it back. ACT5, the aftermath. Rick Hollister filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in March 2020. The settlement was paid through liquidation proceeds and personal asset sales. He lost the dealership building. He lost his inventory. He lost the family home his grandfather built in 1965. But more than that, he lost his standing in the community. In rural towns, reputation isn't abstract. It's economic. Nobody would hire him. Nobody would do business with him. Nobody would even make eye contact at the co-op. Rick's wife, who had worked in the dealership office for 20 years, left him 4 months after the bankruptcy filing. Not because of the money. Because everywhere she went, people whispered. That's Rick Hollister's wife. You know what he did. Their 2 adult children, both living out of state, stopped coming home for holidays. One of them changed their last name. For the 12 farmers who'd bought the altered tractors, the aftermath was complicated. Most kept the machines. They were still good iron, even with higher hours than advertised, but the resale value was destroyed. Nobody wanted to buy a tractor that had been part of the Hollister case. Ethan Crow, the 28-year-old who'd exposed the fraud, became a controversial figure in the community. Some people saw him as a whistleblower who'd done the right thing. Others saw him as the kid who'd destroyed a family business over a technicality. One older farmer confronted him at a grain elevator and said, "You cost 4 people their jobs over some hours on a meter." Ethan's response was blunt. He lied to 12 families. Don't blame me for telling the truth. But the tension lingered. In tight-knit communities, even justified accountability creates fractures. The broader impact on the used equipment market was immediate. Buyers started demanding full diagnostic printouts before closing deals. Dealerships started third-party certifying hour meters. Some dealers began using blockchain-verified hour tracking to prove authenticity. The Hollister case became a cautionary tale across the Midwest dealer network. AGCO circulated the case internally as a training example of catastrophic reputational failure. And for a generation of young farmers buying used iron, the lesson was clear. Trust, but verify. Rick Hollister eventually moved 2 counties over and took a job as a parts clerk at a small short-line dealership. He works in the back. He doesn't interact with customers. He makes $16 an hour. He's 59 years old. He'll never own a business again. He'll never get his name back. And every day, he drives past farms where tractors are running. Tractors that could have been sold by Hollister Ag Equipment if he just sold them straight. There's a particular kind of tragedy in watching someone destroy something their family spent generations building. Rick Hollister didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a fraud. He made a decision under pressure. He justified it with desperation, and then he repeated it until the pattern became routine. 17 tractors, 17 altered hour meters, 17 lies that felt small in the moment. Until one 28-year-old farmer ran a diagnostic check and posted 2 photos on Facebook, and then the lies weren't small anymore. They were federal fraud. They were front-page news. They were the reason a 43-year-old dealership collapsed in 87 days. Rick Hollister sold good equipment. The Massey Fergusons he sold were solid machines, reliable iron, built to work, but he sold them with rolled-back meters. And in a community where your word is the only guarantee that matters, that single choice erased everything else. The tractors still run, the farmers still plant. But the name Hollister doesn't mean what it used to mean. It means the dealer who lied. And in a small farming town, that's a legacy you can't outlive.